Let me introduce Lily, her mother's flower. To all eyes behold, her beauty had a power. The hearts of schoolboys it would devour, and she knew brushes and powder only made the beauty louder. She was more than a pretty face, though I shouldn't have to say this. She was book smart and worked hard and knew her graft would lead to changes. Her teachers saw a future of Oxford or Cambridge. The boys would lose their minds while she was lost in her pages. It was with Holly and Hayley, hearts of the crew. But as secondary school came to a close, a new feeling grew. She'd heard rumours of those linking up and taking a leap through that passage of puberty, hard knowing when it's not happening to you. Because she was popular but feared an almighty one, not just her mum, a home religion of which she was one. So when boys came calling, she never let them have their fun. Till she bumped into Liam, who moved into number 21. Liam was a couple years older, used to be the class joker, had too many chips on his shoulder, had a maturity that came with whipping in his motor. It was a drive or desire that took her mind and body over. She didn't know what she wanted, but wanted him to know. Walked the long way home to pass his end of the road. He didn't notice it at first, but fell for a youthful glow. Guess we all know how this story tends to go. Took her on a dinner date, promised not to drop her late, brought out red heels, red dress while her mum was away. Their laughter filled the bar and continued to the car, but she counted his advances to keep her science teacher safe. Then Hayley found out and couldn't believe that it was true. FaceTimed Lily to tell her all the things that she knew about when her cousin's best friend fell for him too, but she spoke to deaf ears because Lil was lost in the stew, and she was so well fed she didn't see those red flags. Till he started calling 5 times when she hadn't texted back, questioning whether this is how a boyfriend should really act, because if it is, she thought she's not really ready for that. So she applied pressure to the break, feared that this pressure would make her break, confided in her girls who were worried for her sake and flaked on plans with Liam for one night out with her mates. And it's a small town in which they live. And school's out now, so there's only one bar they're gonna hit. But as soon as the bouncer waves them in, she sees Liam and his boys sitting in a booth, on his face a tiny grin. But he didn't speak to her that night, apart from when he came to say hi. Squeezed her arm proper tight, he had a glint in his eye that was giving her a fright. Then he left with his boys and she partied all night. The next day she thought he would blow up her phone, but the silence that he served her made her feel so alone. Her friend's advice on her mind, but she was in love and didn't know, so she called him and he invited her to his home. There was a calmness in his place as he began to explain all the things that she'd done wrong in the first place, but when she stood up for herself, the atmosphere just changed. Didn't see her wrongdoing until his fist was in her face. Although she could barely stand, she found strength from somewhere and just ran. Happy her mum was at work so she could plan how to explain how the marks on her face had come from her man. Her confidence was so appalling, the way she explained to people how she'd fallen. And of course Liam was still calling, her mum too busy to see how far the petals of her flower had started falling. And as much as she tried to heal, she couldn't turn her feelings off. Met him to find closure, but didn't know what it would cost, because when he put his hand on her cheek, she knew that she had lost. He had the key to her heart and knew it was unlocked. Liam was well versed in atoning for his crime. Over 4 or 5 dates, he explained the history behind the things that he'd seen his dad do had messed him up inside, and he swore in his life that this first time would be the last time. On the 6th date, she couldn't explain how they were linked by this scene, how he could make her weak at the knees. So she came back to his place and let him part the sea, fell into a primal greed she never knew that she would need. A few weeks passed and they were doing just fine. Then she realised there was no blood between her thighs, until she was faced with those 2 frightening blue lions, and all she could do was cry. First thing, she called Holly, because she knew she'd had a scare, and Holly was there but knew this couldn't only be her burden to bear. So she told Hayley, who cared about the safety of her friends, so she shared the news with Lil's mum in the hope that she could repair. Lily's mum had never been one to scream and shout, so when her daughter came home, few words could leave her mouth. Just handed her a suitcase and told her to get out, that her flower could no longer plant its roots within her house. Lily felt so lucky, because she was broken by this act, that she had a man who she knew would always have her back, and he did. And together they moved into a flat, and he worked overtime for their baby, felt like their life was back on track. Then a few months later it crept up rather quick, how his hurtful jabs would start to stick. Came back late one night, she told him how she'd had enough of this. Their war of words escalated to a kamikaze fist. She told him this was it, but they both knew on the low that as much as she threatened, she had nowhere else to go. At her mum she couldn't show, that tear had not yet sown, and her friends were cut off too for the disloyal stones they'd thrown. So Liam's anger she tried to throw, lost control and became a victim to the bottle. The introduction of Jack Daniel turned her home into a hostel. She was a backpacker in a foreign land, a stranger in her novel. Day after day, Lily's life was feeling rocky. So she puts her stubbornness away and met Hayley for a coffee. 2 hours of heaven with the posse, but all Hayley could think about was the weakness in her friend's body. So when she left, Hayley, with no notion of being noble, made another call, but this time she made it to the social. Because Hayley wasn't hopeful that her mate would make her suffering vocal. This time she made sure a friend would be her vocal. An unannounced visit was booked for the very next day, in the hope of keeping a young mum and her baby safe. Little did Lily know about the hope of better days, but an emergency came up, and her visit was delayed. And that same night, Liam staggered home like a great white, swimming in the liquor. He gave his girls a great fright, so Lily put her baby to bed and tucked her under the moonlight. It's heartbreaking to realise it would be the last time she'd kiss her baby goodnight. Of course, abuse was never in the plan, but she fell in love with a toxic man. A poison from the roots, a lily blossomed black. How many flowers do you know who never found the strength and ran? This is for all the people who have a Lily in their lives, and all the men who know a Liam who thinks his actions are justified. Anger at his failures in life when he hit his girlfriend twice. Lily was a beautiful flower, but in the end, that flower died.